This is a story I have definitely told before, but I'm going to tell it a little bit differently with more information. And the reason I am is because the new folks are particularly bad about back watching. And I don't know if that is more of a, you know what, let's not look back. Let's just look forward. Let's look ahead. And I'm definitely pro that idea, like looking forward, looking ahead. But sometimes it comes to me making the content and putting it out and having it sometimes be super old and then getting asked the same questions. I gotta revisit it. And sometimes it's fun to revisit. I like revisiting things. Looking back isn't necessarily such a bad thing. So this is the story about when I first transitioned into being a goth. Like when I went from, I guess you can say, Normieville into alternative subcultures and eventually goth. And how did that happen? But obviously with a lot more details thrown in there, because there were definitely things that I left out because they weren't really pertinent. But let's just get into it. I am originally from New York, born and raised in New York, and there was a brief stint, a period of about 4 to 5 years, where we moved to Florida. And the reason that we moved to Florida is because we weren't really rich. That's putting it lightly. We were poor. And we're living in Queens, and my mother had gotten into a car accident. There was a big settlement, and most of my family had trekked down to Florida anyway. And in 1990, they decided, all right, this is where we're going. So moved down to Florida with, a whole new life and a new kind of perspective on things, because we went from poor living in New York to pretty well off living in Florida. Very, very different. And at the time, I was about 10 years old, 10 or 11, moving there. Despite the fact that it was a short amount of time, given my age range at the time being 11 to 14, it had an effect in such a way to where I had acclimated, and I basically went through puberty in Florida, in this area. So I was a lot more Florida than I was New York. Even though I was born and raised in New York, it was just the right time and kind of period in my life for me to become, I guess, a woman, for lack of a better way to put it, in that environment. Which probably wasn't the best place to go about that. There was highly evangelical. There was a lot of teen pregnancies. And the part of Florida we were in was fairly underdeveloped in a lot of ways. So it was very cut off from the rest of the world in a lot of ways. And even curriculum-wise in school, I think they said it was 2 years behind everywhere else. So where I'd come from in New York, going to Florida, I was doing things in the 5th grade. I started school in the 5th grade, and curriculum-wise, I was like, I did this in the 3rd grade. But that being said, my parents it was more so my mother, she couldn't stand Florida. And understandably, at the time I couldn't understand because I had adjusted so well there, and this was basically my home. I had friends, I had roots, I had a boyfriend that I was, it was my first boyfriend, very obsessed with, didn't want to leave. For my mother, on the other hand, she had her roots in New York and Florida, coming from a New Yorker who, my mother was very much involved in the punk scene. She was used to the fast-paced life, used to the sort of lifestyle that would come along with being a New Yorker, and then moving to South Florida in the early 90s, which is cut off from everything, and looking at my mother from their PTA meetings and their Bibles, like, who are you? So my mother did not acclimate. She wanted out ASAP, and so we went back to New York. And it was a culture shock. Despite me hailing from the area, it was a very big culture shock to me. But instead of moving to Queens, we moved to the easternmost part of Suffolk County. One of the most easternmost part, not quite easternmost. It was Ronkonkoma. And this is where we moved to. And at that time, remember I said my family was a little bit more on the affluent side due to a settlement? Yeah, that was gone by that point. So we kind of had to move somewhere cheaper. But that's okay. I didn't mind because it worked out to my benefit. And I think the way everything aligned, everything kind of came together to create this perfect storm, but a good storm that made me into the person that I am today. And I'm eternally grateful for that. So where we moved, there was a girl that lived across the street. I call her the Welcome Wagon. Her name was Dawn, and I'm still friends with Dawn to this very day. She lived across the street, and her parents forced her to come over when we moved in to our house, the big red house in Ronkonkoma. And she came over to say hello to the new girl who was around her age, and invited me out, invited me to hang out with her friends, and invited me to a club night called The Shop. Now, Dawn was very much alternative. I very much was not. I was not familiar very well with alternative people, and the alternative people that I did know were people that listened to things like Metallica, and we called them headbangers. But very few and far between, so I didn't know much about alternative really at all, other than, say, my parents. She invites me to a club called The Shop, which was Voodoo Lounge on other nights. If you are from Long Island and you're from that era, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So she invites me out to this night, and she's like, it's great, it's all alternative, all of Long Island's alternative kids are there, and she was indeed correct. This place was intense, and I wish they had something like this today, because all of the younger generation, the new kids getting involved, even not even just goth, but alternative, you would love this place. It was amazing. So it was in an industrial park, and if you're unfamiliar with what an industrial park is, I'll try to explain it. It's essentially a neighborhood, but people don't live there. It's for businesses and warehouses. This was a warehouse, and the people who had purchased the warehouse turned it into a club. So it was huge, massive, and it had many, 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 many rooms, and they adapted this place to be quite the little labyrinth of different subcultures. So Dawn, she wanted to dress me up. She's like, no, you can't wear your normal girl clothes. She called them fluff clothes. She's like, no, you dress like a fluff. These people are not fluffs. We're alternative. And, oh no, I'm sorry. You can't dress like a fluff because we are freaks. And as we are freaks, you have to dress as such. And I was a little bit protesty at the moment because I didn't quite understand a lot of... I didn't quite connect to the aesthetic on the more extreme level, so I kept it mediocre. And I think we took it to a level Bjork, which I was okay with. And she put me in a silver shirt, and that was basically it. And this is a picture from that very night. So you have to understand, like, this is what I looked like my first day of school. I wasn't exactly the most alternative of alternative kids, but I was also not the most normal of normal kids. I'd always been weird as hell. I was made fun of for it. I was kind of alienated quite a bit for it. I always considered myself like abnormal, and it's basically because of the way that other people around me had treated me, like the normal people, because I was so out there with just the way that I acted, the way that I saw the world. And I was just I've always been very random. I would just say random things that were normal to me, but when other people would hear it, they would either give me this look of, oh my God, what is wrong with you? Or just flat out say, why are you like this? What is wrong with you? And, you know, I kind of had to force myself to mirror other people's behavior just so I wasn't so alienated from other people, just so I can have friends. And it sucked. And every now and again, the real me kind of popped out, and I would have to like repress, push it back down. But it wasn't until meeting Dawn and meeting all of her friends and getting involved and going to this place for the first time where I realized that I'm not weird. I'm just not what I was pretending to be. I just hadn't found who I was. So we go to this club. She dresses me up. We were waiting online to get in, and I'm looking at all of these kids that are outside waiting to get in, and they're so interesting. Girls with shaved heads and people with neon colored hair, and they're all like, this is the era of the backpack. So something that was really in at the time were these little backpacks that people wore. They're like this big, and there were these little backpacks, and some of them were just clear plastic of different colors, and they just kind of wore those backpacks accessorized, and they would have glitter makeup. Glitter was very big. Glitter was a very big thing. Glitter makeup, black lipstick, another very big thing, and hanging unconventional items from yourself, such as tampons, spoons, toys, you name it. There are a lot of people carrying lunch boxes because that was the cool thing to do. And whereas now it's kind of seen, I'm going to like totally age myself here, whereas now it's seen as this really cool retro relic that goes for a lot of money. Back then, people had their old 1980s lunch boxes, because you got to figure if this was 1994, that means that the 80s were 5 years ago. So it's not like these things were very difficult to come by. Nowadays, you can get them on eBay for like $200. Here I am in a place where I'm surrounded by people that are using it to carry their belongings, carry their wallet, their money, and anything else they could possibly need. I almost said cell phone, but not a single person there had a cell phone. It was 1994. We get to the door, and I make my way in. And it is this kind of long snaking hallway, and it was so dramatic because it was like leading me up to the big reveal of my first view. So I'm walking through this hallway, and it's black, and there's strobe lights, and there's gargoyles, and all I hear as we get closer is Nine Inch Nails' Terrible Lie, and the hallway's going. And we make our way into the room, and I look around me to this just sea of black. There were people dancing in ways that I'd never seen people dance before, because it seemed more performance than dance. But you could really see that people were lost and immersed in the music. They were reaching up to the sky, going down to the floor, clawing at themselves, ripping off their own heads. Not literally, but it looked as if they really wanted to. And it was the intensity of all of it that really captured me, because these were people that were really feeling what was going on. They were, and being a teenager, being that young, I'm not used to that. I'm not used to that level of intensity, because things were quite shallow when you're young. And when you're seeing things that are just so incredibly intense, it's overwhelming, but in a good way. Something that I also noticed, and this was a very big learning moment for me, was looking around the room at all the different alternative subcultures. And I didn't know raver from goth. I didn't know industrial from punk. I couldn't tell the difference. All I knew was freak, because that is what Dawn kind of introduced them to me as. And I didn't realize that people were separated here by music, but I was already very much understanding of the concept of people being separated by music, because where I had come from, living in Florida, again, very cut off from the rest of the US, and also a few years behind, and also we were junior high schoolers. So all of that being said, given your age, given our location, we were kind of bound by the music that was either played on the radio or was played on MTV or whatever our parents were listening to. That didn't leave much room for being more really obscure in any way and venturing kind of outside. Whereas, say, the headbangers, as we knew them in Florida, the deepest they went were things like, say, Metallica, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, things like that. So I had learned so many different things that night, just about myself, about music, about people, and I was able to, in one fell swoop, squash the entire concept that music was meant to be divisive in any way. Music is not divisive. That night I learned music brings you together, because looking at all of these kids from all over the place, looking at all these different ethnicities and races, all under one roof, enjoying the same frickin' music, it taught me music brings your asses together, not separates them. So that was an incredible moment for me. I hadn't even started school yet. This was the summertime. So the thing about this club, the shop or Voodoo Lounge, is that it was open to all ages. It was a teen night when there was no school on Monday. So it was open on that Sunday, or it was a holiday. So if you had, like, say, Christmas break or spring break or any kind of break whatsoever, you can count on the Sunday being the all ages. And in the summertime, it was every single Sunday. So I got to enjoy it every Sunday until the school year started. This was still the summertime, and I had gotten to enjoy going to the shop every single Sunday because there was no school on Monday, because it was the summertime. I hadn't actually started school yet, but you would think that I was kind of starting the school year pre-established because I had made all of these friends from the same school, right? Kind of, but no. Now, Sachem, which was the high school that I went to, was separated between North and South Campus. Your North Campus had people in 9th and 10th grade, whereas South had 11th and 12th. Dawn and all of the friends that I had made, they were 1 year above me. However, grade-wise, they were 2 years above me because I was left back in first grade. I don't even know if I would get into it ever. It was a stupid situation. Yes, I was left back in the first grade. And that made them, by school year, 2 years above me despite being only 1 year above me. But we may as well have been miles apart considering the complete and utter isolation I felt basically starting a new school in a new place with a ton of people that I didn't know. So when I started the school year, I didn't actually start dressing alternative yet because I wasn't sure where my aesthetic lied. I didn't know quite what to wear, and I was still very comfortable in, I guess, as Dawn would call them, my fluff clothes. So for the first few months of school, I dressed fluffy, even though I was listening to alternative music. So at the time, the alternative music that I was listening to was the majority of which being, I would say, grunge music. Grunge and some other, I don't know what you would categorize them, but I was listening to things like Tori Amos, I was listening to things like Bjork, L7, Babes in Toyland, I was listening to Nirvana, Hole, Smashing Pumpkins. I loved Smashing Pumpkins. And The Cure, I was listening to a lot of Cure, Depeche Mode, and then there was a little bit of industrial thrown in there, like Frontline Assembly, a little bit of Skinny Puppy, but the majority of which being more, I would say, kind of Smashing Pumpkins, The Cure, Nirvana heavy, if that can kind of paint a picture for you. So I started the school year, fluff clothes, I knew nobody, listened to alternative music, but when you are 14 years old, it's a 9th grade, people just look at you and they base their view on what they see. And what really sucked, I don't know if it's the same now in high schools, but at my high school and at this particular time, if the alternative groups, they witnessed your transition in any way, as in they saw you normal first, it doesn't matter. You will never be accepted. You are considered a poser in their eyes. And that is exactly what happened to me. I started school, I dressed fluffy, and then I slowly started coming into my own and started getting more and more alternative clothes. The more I integrated with other people from my grade, because as I said, my friends Dawn and the others, they were in the other campus. They were in the North Campus, which was the 11th and 12th grade. Well, I was stuck in the 9th and 10th with nobody I knew, but I made friends. Made friends with some people, and I made friends with alternative kids, and I slowly started integrating. And the thing about that is, you know how nowadays a lot of the newer goths, they like to further kind of break things down and compartmentalize things, place themselves in little boxes. Like there are so many of these subtypes that people try to like box themselves in. And I just want to digress for a second. Just remember this. When you're united under the umbrella of a subculture being the music, and you put yourself inside a little box, when you're inside a box, you're leaving everyone else outside the box. That's isolation in a situation where there should be unity, and there should be togetherness, and there should be community. So when you were united under this freak flag, so to speak, the different subcultures like punk, metal, goth industrial, they always hung together, grunge, everybody, although they had their little subcultures that all revolved around their music, we were all kind of one and the same. We were all freaks. As time went on, I started listening to less and less of the grunge, and I started getting more and more into industrial music. Not goth, but industrial music. And I had heard goth, but I didn't like it. I guess I just was not ready. My ears and my brain were not ready to receive it, because the things that I was hearing things like Bauhaus. I was hearing things like Sisters of Mercy, your very basic stuff. I wasn't ready for that. I could not comprehend that sound, and it didn't resonate. But I did listen to a lot of industrial. So I started listening to a lot of Terminal Sect. I was listening to KMFDM. I was listening to Frontline Assembly. I was listening to Skinny Puppy. I was listening to Sister Machine Gun. A lot of things on the Wax Trax label. And since a lot of it was a little more electronic based, I think with a lot of people, and this is something that I found, because I did this a lot when I was trying to, in the future, when I was trying to kind of get people more into goth music, what I would do was I would choose things that were more electronic based, things like dark wave or ethereal, anything that had synthesizers in it, because I found that when kind of easing people in, anything that incorporated anything electronic, they seemed to tolerate it better and they seemed to connect to it a lot easier, and it was easier to bridge that gap for them. And the same thing happened to me, because as I was listening to more industrial music, I then started getting into a lot more new wave music, like a lot of the things I remember listening to as a kid, but I started digging a little bit deeper. And then I started listening to things like Berlin, and I was listening to Flock of Seagulls. Oh my God, my Flock of Seagulls CD, I loved that CD. Pet Shop Boys, Erasure, Human League, Culture Club, Psychedelic Furs, The Smiths, Morrissey, More The Cure. So all of the things that I was listening to were very new wave, and the new wave, as you know, has that kind of romantic feel to it, like Duran Duran. And it makes sense, being a lot of it that I did listen to were like Spandau Ballet, all part of the new romantic scene. But the thing about that is, me listening to industrial and then kind of moving over and incorporating listening to a lot of new wave and new romantic sounding music, it created the perfect storm for me to be able to revisit goth and understand it and handle it and find it more palatable. Because when I heard it in the beginning, I freaking hated it. And then I was able to revisit, and I'm like, oh, my ears, they love this. And that is when I was able to kind of really transition and become part of the goth scene, because it happened fast. I was 15 years old by this point, and I was definitely very much immersed in the goth scene, because once I listened to goth and I was able to receive it, I went nuts. Among the girls, when we had fashion, it was communal fashion, meaning that if I had a dress, all of the other girls had that dress. Same thing with if they had a shirt or pants. And this miraculous thing happened with physics to where it didn't matter what size you were. If my friend was 2 to 3 sizes smaller or bigger than me, that dress that I had that was my size would still fit her. It was magic. But the same thing applied when it came to music. So when one person had a CD, barring a few people who were jerks, I had this one friend, Sean, who he would show you. He wouldn't physically show you. He would just put headphones on your ears and say, listen to this. And you'd hear it, and it would be an incredible song. And you're like, oh my God, I love it. What is this? And he'd take the headphones back and say, I don't reveal my sources, and saunter off. Hated that. But a lot of my other friends that were closer to my age, he was older, were a lot nicer about that kind of thing. So we had the communal CDs. If one person had the CD, that means you get it on tape. So when my friend had one CD that I really liked and wanted to listen to, I would borrow it, put it in my boombox, and it was super easy. This is what we did. You get a blank tape, or if you didn't have a blank tape, you just stole a tape from your parents and you filled the little crevices, because they came with these little crevices, these divots on the top end that prohibited you from recording over it. So the little, I guess, like the device didn't kind of click into place. However, if you stuffed something in those holes, like a chewed up piece of paper, and then did it, you could record over it. I recorded over my dad's Peter Frampton Comes Alive with, I think it was Lords of the New Church. He still doesn't know what happened. Well, of course he doesn't know. He's dead now. But he didn't at the time know what happened to that tape. But it was in my room, which had been repurposed into Lords of the New Church. So you would put the CD in top of your boombox, and then you'd put your cassette tape in the tape player, rewind it to the very beginning, and then hit play and record at the same time, and it would record everything that was on that CD. It's fantastic. But you had to make sure to stay close to it, because you had to be there to flip it over to the next side once you reach the end, and make sure you didn't cut a song off. It's very tedious. But so I've been to many alternative clubs, as in all-age alternative clubs, but I never actually went to a goth night, and that was something that was very high up on my list. But it was also something that scared me to death, because I wanted to be accepted in this new thing, in this new scene, and this is the music that I loved. But what I knew from magazines. Because back in the early 90s, if you were looking for any information as it pertained to goth, you may as well have been looking for Sasquatch because you weren't going to find it. So everything we got from word of mouth and via publications. And in your publications, you had magazines like Propaganda, Carpe Noctem, some others that I can't remember, but I'm sure I'll remember once the video is complete, and I'll just put them in the description. But looking at the goths in those magazines, it was very, very intimidating because I'm a scraggly little 15-year-old. I'm not great at doing my makeup. I don't have the best in the way of clothing. And I'm looking at Propaganda and I'm looking at Carpe Noctem and I'm seeing these people in their goth finery, in their poet shirts, in their alchemy jewelry, perfectly done makeup, this long, luscious, teased, crimped hair, and I have a short bob, which, by the way, huge transition because I started school with like waist-length chestnut brown hair. By a few months into 9th grade, my hair was shoulder length and purple. A couple months after that, I had a short asymmetrical bob shaved in the back, dyed black. You know, once I reached goth, I felt like I've kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, I reached my ultimate form. It felt like home to me. And I'd listened to a lot of different types of music, and I'd listened to a lot of different types of alternative music. And where it all really resonated with me, nothing quite resonated with me as much as goth did, which was ironic to me because when I'd first heard it, I hated it so much. But now all of a sudden this thing was capturing my freaking soul, and I just wanted more and more and more. And it was amazing being part of it, and I'm still part of it. So I went through a lot of trial and error with clothes. I went to thrift stores all the time, and I've talked about them. I even made a video about them. The infamous slip. Slips were amazing because they were like the ultimate goth wear. It was like it had satin, it had lace, it had chiffon, and it was cheap. They were ubiquitous. You could shred them, you could layer them, and you could find a pair of fishnet tights that you could shred up and make a shirt and wear underneath it and have yourself an outfit. And that was kind of the closest thing that I had to really anything that made me feel like I was part of the flock, because I know that we often say that goth being a music-based subculture, the fashion comes second. And it really is true. New York, to me, has always been a lot more interested in the music more than anything else. And when I had first gotten involved and I was first really integrating, people tended to, they would want to know your 10 most ride or die favorite albums of all time. And that would kind of tell them everything that they needed to know about you. A lot of the discussions I remember were always very music based, and that is how I learned. And being that I was young, I knew things, but I didn't know a lot, and I certainly didn't know as much as the other people around me. And in a lot of ways, that made me feel very insecure. But it never really deterred me. I just wanted to strive to do better, to learn more. Everything I heard, even if it was things that I didn't know, I loved it. Most of it, I loved. There were certain bands, I won't mention them because I know there are a lot of people who are like die hard these bands, and you'll be in my comments freaking out. How dare you? People have preferences. Just because you're a goth doesn't mean you have to like every single goth band. I mean, there are people who hate Bauhaus. There are people who hate Sisters of Mercy. Now, there's nothing wrong with the division by way of subcultures because it's what helps you find the music. Punk, metal, goth, industrial. All of these things, they're necessary because they help you find the music. But these little subdivisions, they're a little bit different. They create division, they create isolation, they cause confusion. So what I mean by being under that freak flag is I really think that they would benefit from a place like the shop, a place where you could walk in, every alternative kid feels welcome, and they're united under that flag, and they hear all of the different music that they like, but they can all kind of unite under the fact that we're weird, we're different, we're not like everybody else, but we're also not that different. We're still human beings after all. We just like different crap. And you could come together and unite under the fact that you like different crap. And who knows, you might find and discover a new band from a different subculture that you might not have heard before and like it. Because another thing is, it is not a prerequisite to being a goth to only listen to goth music, because there are goths that listen to so many different other types of music. They just happen to prefer goth among all. And that's okay. But I think it's more enriching to kind of integrate with people from these other subcultures, because you get a different perspective on a lot of things, and you open yourself up to new experiences and new things, and you meet new people. And I am so incredibly indebted to Dawn for showing me this place and showing me this thing, because it's made me who I am today. And I've learned so much from all of these different people. And I think that's probably why a lot of the older goths, like the Zennials and the Gen X's, have so many issues with labels. Some don't even like the label of goth. They'll tell you to shut the hell up when it comes to that kind of thing. But I don't mind it, because I enjoy being a goth. I love the subculture. Plus, as I said, it helps you find the music. But when it comes to just further breaking it down, kind of look at the goth subculture as like a turnkey home. This is going to be a very vague and weird description, but a turnkey home is a home that you can move into and no work needs to be done to it. It's not a fixer-upper. It's already been painted. You can just move right in, and it is there for you to live your life, make your memories, and enjoy. It doesn't need you to go in and create 10 rooms out of one room, causing chaos, disrupting the structural integrity, and confusing the hell out of people. So that is my weird, vague analogy with goth being already there and ready for you. Don't try to compartmentalize things, because when you compartmentalize things and you put yourself inside a box, you're leaving everyone else outside that box, and you're isolating yourself. Isolation and unity are two things that do not go together, and subcultures are all about community and unity, not isolation. So try to be a little bit more open-minded when it comes to that kind of thing, and leave the subtypes and things, leave those at the gate. If you're looking for clothing, if you're looking for fashion, that's when they come into play, because descriptors are good when you're looking for things that you need. Say you want to find a particular style of shoe or dress or pants or anything, that's when they come in handy. But don't let the clothes wear you, because when you're selecting all of these different things and you're turning that into your identity, that's when the clothes wear you. And then that's where you become a little bit lost in the sauce. This whole journey is about adventure. It's about discovery. It is about being you and enjoying life. So I hope that you found this video helpful, and I hope it helps you with your journey as a new goth, or maybe even brought up some memories for you. I don't know. But until next time.